Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show, man. I tell you what, again, my favorite intro is always my very good friend, my best buddy, all the way from the city. And those of you who don't know that, you can call me later and ask me where that is. But you need to get educated on culture. Michael Markiewicz, my friend, how are you today?
I'm great, Otis. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good, doing good. I am so excited. We've known each other for a little while now, but this is fun to really get to hear more about the what's going on behind the numbers sort of thing with you. And my first thought is, okay, Mr. Accountant, because by the way, as our friend Dan has pointed out many times, Michael ain't your normal accountant. So yeah, as you can already tell just in this first few minutes of the show, this is not your atypical accountant that's crunching numbers and don't. Michael
I was gonna
loves
say
people.
he's talking a lot already for an accountant.
Well, yeah. Oh, I'm doing the fumbling thing. What, Michael? Why numbers? Because I know you love the arts and everything else, but why'd you get into becoming an accountant?
Okay, so back when I was in high school, which was eons ago, literally, I was always really good in math. I excelled in math, even when I took a high school calculus course, and I was really good in that. And I remember my teacher, his name was Mr. Horn, in my high school, he used to tell my parents, he's really great in math. He needs to explore this. And so, interestingly enough, when I applied to colleges, I initially applied to like engineering programs and actually got into an engineering program at my alma mater, which is Tufts University. And I stayed in my engineering program for about one semester before I decided that this was too restrictive for me, and I really needed to get into the liberal arts program, so I transferred.
Hmm.
But in that first semester, I took calculus, physics, computer science, and chemistry, and I thought, the,
Ouch. That hurt. That makes my head
ouch,
hurt.
these subjects are so dry, and I just need to expand my mind here. And so I got all my science requirement done in my first semester. But so then what happened is I go through my 4 years, and I decided to double major in economics and sociology. And then I realized that when I was getting closer and closer to graduation, what am I going to do with all of this? I could become an economist, or I could become an anthropologist or a sociologist, but it didn't really fit with my game plan, nor, and my parents, still at that time had a tremendous amount of influence over my decisions. And, they were, they come from an era of having nothing
Mm-hmm.
to wanting their children to do really, really well. So, we had that discussion with my parent. I had that discussion with my parents, and they said, you really ought to think about a profession, because you can always fall back on a profession just in case. So, what are the professions we talked about? We talked about me being a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a dentist, and I didn't want any of those other things. But I thought accounting kind of like, you know, it's kind of interesting to me. And so I applied to graduate programs for MBA programs, and one master of science program in accounting, and I decided to go that route. And I look back on it and say to myself, the MBA program would have been a lot more general, but the Master of Science in Accounting was a lot more focused. And when I got out, I'd have a job, and I'd earn money, and I could start my life. So that's what I chose, and that's how I became an accountant. And then, of
Was
course,
it
all the things that happened after that with, working for various different CPA firms and whatnot. But that is, the road about how I entered this field.
was it was it a love of math and of the numbers, or was it more that you loved that you were good at it and you kind of wanted to pile onto that skill?
Well, I think it's the latter, that I was really good at it. It came naturally to me. Um, it didn't mean that I didn't love what I was doing, but when I started out in the world working, a lot of it was focused on quote unquote numbers and tax law and that kind of thing. And and audit. They put me on audits. Oh my God, I hated audit. I really did. I don't do audit. I haven't done audit, and I couldn't tell you how long, probably 25, 30 years. And but what I wanted to do was parlay my knowledge into areas of still being a CPA, providing a service, but that I could have passion about. So, for example, after I came to New York, 26 years ago, I ended up finding this really great job with what's called the business management firm that serves people in the entertainment and sports industry. And of course, there are numbers and technical stuff still involved in all of that, but I got this feel for other things that are out there that I can be good at, that feed my passion. And so I worked with celebrities, that the names of which most people would know. And I got to go to like opening night parties, and I got to go to all kinds of stuff that really fed my passions. And so to answer your question, Camden, that is where I kind of transitioned my career.
I love that, because I could only imagine you describing chemistry as dry, but like I'm thinking you get to blow stuff up in chemistry, and then you went over to accounting and found the passion there. So I love that you were able to take that skill and find the way to build the passion on top of it, because I think a lot of people get stuck at those type of jobs that they're really skilled at, but they never actually have that passion.
Camden, I really hate painting with a broad brush, but I would say the majority of CPAs I know are stuck exactly where you just said. And that's all they do. And that's all they know how to do. It's all they have any ambition to do. I'm just not one of those people, because I'm an entrepreneur and I do other things besides my CPA practice. I invest in projects, and I'm a CFO of a private equity firm, and we do some really fun stuff, including in Colorado, Otis, as you know.
Yeah.
And we do some really, really interesting things. And I'm still, I'm an investor in theater, I'm an investor in live performance, and, the arts and music and all that stuff are passions of mine. So I'm very diverse in terms of how I spend my time and what I do.
How did you break that out? Because what, like Camden said, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more, because there's the people that are doing like you, that are I do my day job to fund some other passions. I used to do that with rugby, but then there's those other folks that are like, well, I can't do this job because it doesn't fulfill my passion. There's people that get really kind of pigeonholed, I guess is the way I would put it, into that, instead of, well, find your passion and fund it. So how did you, kind of, I guess, take that leap, or realize that there was more? Maybe it started when you were younger. I don't know. Curious about
part of it is I literally got bored. I got bored doing the traditional kind of accounting tax work. And I mean, I do that stuff even now, but I can't do just that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those people that allows myself to get pigeonholed. And then you raised an interesting point, Otis, when you said, well, find your passion, but a lot of people don't know how to transition that. I would venture to say that many people, and again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, many people in the CPA profession don't really have a passion. I mean, for them, it's the work. It's a traditional model. You go to work, you earn your money, you have a family, you provide for your family, maybe you go to the movies, take a 2-week vacation, and then you go back to work. I'm just not one of those people. And I'm not denigrating it. I'm not saying that that's bad. if it works for you, that's great. It just
Mm.
didn't work for me. And for example, I've traveled all over the world. I have traveled to virtually every continent, not Antarctica yet.
Yet.
I would actually like to at some point, but I've traveled all over the world. And, you know, when I first started out my career, I remember I would take a month off and I went to the Middle East and Europe. And then I took another month off the next year and I traveled by car across the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast. And you know, I've done things that a lot of people dream about doing, but never act upon doing. And like when well, you know this, Otis. I don't know if you know this, Kendon, but you know, we recently purchased a place in Spain, in Madrid. And when I told people about that, there's one guy I know who used to be my personal trainer, and he said, because I put it up on Facebook, and he responded to me. He said, "Michael, you talked about this for a long time. You realized your dream." And I said, "Yeah, well, but life is too short to not realize your dream." So that's how I look at it. That's how I look at life. That's how I look at my career. That's how I look at almost everything.
Do you think the accounting and the economics background helps you to balance that? Because I think where a lot of people struggle with this is that they have these visions, these dreams, and all this kind of, things that they want to do, but then like the realism kind of, life pulls them back down a little bit. And I find that, just like when we're talking about the passions and doing what you love, it's a little bit of a, you have to find that creative solution to be able to balance these different things. Because buying a house, and I think you said just Spain, right? Buying a house in Spain costs money. And if you're going to Spain, you can't do your job in New York. And, there's all sorts of constraints like that. So do you think your accounting and economics background helps you to balance that and, give you a little bit of an advantage there?
I think it does give me an advantage. It's one of the reasons that I feel very strongly that having that as my background and my primary career for many years has really allowed me, and I'm blessed this way. I really do feel blessed this way. It has allowed me to understand the financial aspects of all of these decisions. And so I don't know, I really don't know how else to address it other than to say, I have a really good background and understanding of the money part of everything because of everything that I've ever done and career-wise, where now I can say, all right, so if I'm going to do this, this is how I have to do it. And I know that it's going to take X number of dollars, or in this case, euro, and you got to have a bank account in Spain. You got to move money to the bank account. What's the best way to do that? And so I'm pretty well versed on all of that stuff. And, but I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I think I would say that having the background that I have in the accounting and finance worlds have really assisted me tremendously in being able to make those decisions and actually accomplish doing those things.
What's like one thing that you think people miss on that is maybe hurting their potential, kind of going back to what I said of like, they don't see that creative solution. They're kind of stuck in a box type of thing. What's your one piece of advice, I guess?
Oh gosh.
Just one.
Just one.
I can't tell anyone to think like me. I'll tell you one of the things I believe that holds people back is fear. And fear can be crippling. If someone says, well, I'm not going to do this because what happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if, I fail? Or what happens if I lose my job? What happens if I make a decision that's not going to be good for my spouse or significant other or my children if you have children? And fear holds people back. And so I don't know how to tell people to overcome fear, but there are ways to overcome fear. And whether that's you working with a coach or a therapist or an advisor or a mentor, I think fear is something that holds people back. I mean, and I know this is going to sound a little cliche-ish because everybody knows this quote. And it's from FDR when he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm not really quite sure I answered your question directly, but
No, I like it.
but that's the only way I know how to answer it, Camden.
Yeah, I think fear is such like an important component there. And this makes me think of a conversation I actually had with a client yesterday, talking about fear and how like the insidious nature of fear and how it's always going to be there. And I think that's one piece, to kind of spin that a little bit more of maybe a little bit of applicable advice, is that fear is always going to be there, and that you kind of have to get used to putting that fear away and addressing that fear on a regular basis. Because if you buy that trip, you buy your plane ticket to take the family off to Europe for a few weeks, the fear is not going to go away after you buy that ticket. Then the fear is going to switch to, okay, well, now what are we going to do financially after we bought the ticket? What are we going to do? What if something happens? Like that fear is always going to find a way to manifest. And I think it's such an important thing of recognizing that. And then once you recognize it, you can be proactive and start to, fight that fear in that way.
Well, it's interesting because Otis, you and I were in a place this past weekend in Mobile, Alabama, where fear was a topic that was discussed extensively. And fear is, a lot of people have fear, but we have to analyze what and I'm getting a little esoteric here, so I hope you don't mind. But, what is fear? Fear is projecting about something that you in your mind is telling you could potentially happen. Mm-hmm. That projection comes from nowhere. It's just there. It's like that. The attitude of like, what if it fails? What if it doesn't happen? What if this happens and that happens? That's your mind playing tricks on you, because likely most, I'm not going to say all, but most of those things are never going to happen, because we've been trained and brought up, many of us have, to believe all of those things. There's a risk to every decision that you make. And the risk is that, what if it doesn't work out? Then what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And you have to just I think people have to just get to a point where they recognize the fear, they recognize the risk, and they say, yeah, but it's good. What if it does work out? And then just go ahead and do it.
Where did this sense of adventure come? Because, and I want to get to the whole transition out of the corporate accounting line of work to the entrepreneur sense, but you mentioned mom and dad and how they were like, get this professional job, be a doctor, be the professional level sort of thing, but yet you seem to buck the system still with this. I'm gonna take a month off and go to Australia for a month.
Which I did.
Which you did, right. That's probably why that popped.
Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I guess it's just my makeup, it's my personality. My parents were not from the Depression, but my parents were from something that one would say could be potentially a lot worse. They were Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. They lost family members. They lost everything that they had. And when my parents came to this country, they came here with nothing. They had no money at all. And then my father went to work in a factory shop to put a roof over our heads. And I was born here, but put a roof over our heads and to put food on the table and clean clothes and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know any better when I was growing up that it could be different, because that's all I knew. When I grew up in an environment where everybody else we knew was similar to that. And then I went off to college, and I'm not saying this to brag, but I went to my undergraduate school is kind of an elite school. And so most of the students that went to that school came from very well-to-do families. And my world just opened up. My eyes opened up when I saw this. And I said, God, there's so much more out there. And I'm not just talking about financially, because, yeah, that's a piece of it, but just in terms of what worlds open up to you when you're not living out of fear. And I wanted that. And I've taken a lot of risks in my life, and some have worked out, some haven't, but the majority of them have. And as an example, when I moved to New York 26 years ago, I had no clue what that was going to be like. It's not like, I had a business. I had my own practice up in Northern New England, and I sold it. When I came to New York, I had no idea what I was going to do. I spent my first year in New York. I didn't even look for work. I wanted to get my feet wet and understand what life could be like in New York. And God, I went to every Broadway show, and because I love the theater, and I went to all kinds of parties and clubs and got to know a lot of people. And then after a year, I kind of said, I kind of need to buckle down because I need to earn some money. And so I did, and I went to work for a number of different CPA firms here in New York over a period of years. And I realized after a while that I don't want to work for anybody else, and because it's too restrictive. And they have a model of what employer-employee relationships are supposed to be, which works for a whole lot of people, but just never worked for me.
Mm.
And so, I eventually went out on my own, and that's where I am, and never looked back. So that was a big risk, the risk of coming to New York in the first place. Then there was the risk of going out on my own and not having a clue whether this was going to work or not. And it has, thankfully. And I'm grateful every day that it has. I work hard at it, but I'm still grateful. And so it came from, going back to your original question, it came from a place of saying, of kind of saying, I don't want that, but I want this. And so how do I get this? This requires risk taking. Risk also involves fear, but I just plunged in and said, what's the worst thing that can happen to me? I'll go back to work for another company if I needed to earn money. I'd hate it, but I would do it if I needed to support my lifestyle.
I'm really interested in that, because that's you're 100% right. That's what holds so many people back from whatever, whether it's, going on vacation to Mexico or a trek in the Himalayas or starting their own business. You're an accountant. How did you calculate that risk? Because there had to have been something that when I was in the Army, we actually did risk tables, and we would put in mitigation, and we had all this sort of stuff to quantify it. How did you, as an accountant, or just as Michael, when you looked out to step off to start your own business, leave a nice secure corporate job to start your own firm, how did you calculate that risk?
Well, you know what I did? I took a piece of paper, like legal size paper. I drew a line down the middle, and I said, all right, pluses on one side of that line, minuses on the other side of the line. And I started thinking of what all those things are. And I looked at the plus side, I looked at the minus side. And as I was analyzing that sheet of paper and I looked at the minuses, the pluses outweighed them.
Mm.
And so, it wasn't like an in-depth analysis. It was just like an emotional and practical kind of way of looking at what could result from this, and also why I might fail at this. Now, having done that and having said that, when I was my last quote unquote corporate job, I was working for a mid-sized CPA firm here in New York, and I had, a really decent salary, six-figure salary. And when I went out on my own, I knew instinctively that my income was going to go down, at least initially. And it did. It absolutely did. And I realized also, and I knew that I can live within that for a while, all right, and adjust my lifestyle in a way that I'm not going to need more than what I'm earning at that point in time. And then what happened is, in addition to growing my practice, and it has grown, I got to meet amazing people. And a few of those people presented me with opportunities to get involved in other businesses that were not just being a CPA. Okay. So I analyzed all of that, and I have a friend, and we happen to share a birthday actually, who I met like 20 years ago. And he and I, he would always bring me these deals, as it were, to look at. And, for a long time, those deals didn't work out. But then 11 years ago, he formed a company, it's a private equity firm. And he said, Michael, I want you to be my CFO. I said, all right, what does that mean? What does that entail? And so we talked about it, and I said, okay, I can do that. There was no financial obligation on my part to become part of this. So I had nothing to lose. There was, other than some time.
Mhm.
And so I did it, and it has, initially we had some fits and starts in terms of some of the things that we were doing. They didn't work out. But 6 years ago, something happened. And now it's going to work out phenomenally well. And so, so having going back to, I think, what you were asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, having taken that risk as well as some others, I'm going to realize more money in my life than I ever would have dreamed of, ever. So when you put yourself out there and you take the risk and you overcome the fear, then the rewards potentially will come. So, because as Dan said this past weekend, without risk, there's no reward.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I think the other thing that you've done so well with this, Michael, because you kind of you downplay it, but the reality is those things that didn't work, you didn't go, oh my God, we failed, and run away and go back to corporate world, right? You said, well, what did we do wrong, or how do we do it different, or whatever, right? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because those lessons, that's the true power of the now success. It's not the unicorn, right? It's
Right.
all the failures before that one thing that's working.
Well, Otis, you already know this. I'm Camden. I don't know whether you know this, but you may. Um, and we talked about that a lot very recently, Otis, you and I, and the people we were with this weekend. But unless you're willing to fail and make mistakes, you never learn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Embrace the failure, embrace the mistakes, and say, okay, this is what I did. It didn't work out. What should I or could I have done differently? And from that, then the next time you're not going to make that mistake, but you might make another one. And when you make the other one, you say, all right, I'm not going to make that one again, but I might make another one. And I think the important thing that I have learned is to embrace your failures and your mistakes and learn from them. And eventually you're going to get to a place where you're going to run out of mistakes to make. That doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes in other areas of your life or your career or your entrepreneurial spirit or your business. You will, but at least along that way, along that road, you've made mistakes. So what? So you made a mistake. So you failed. So what? Embrace it and move on.
Talking about risk and, risk aversity makes me think of a few different things, but one of them being inside of the business world, when they studies around why there's less women CEOs and why you see less women moving up, like mobility through the ranks of corporate America and lots of those things. And one of the most interesting studies I've read around that was around the natural risk aversity of men versus women. That the reason that men do so well in business is because they are willing to take more risks. And then the way the system is set up, you're basically rewarding people who are willing to take those risks and that wind up successful. And so women wind up being a little bit more risk averse. It's because they take less risk, they get a little bit less of that success. And the reason I wanted to start off with that study and kind of bring it here is I'm thinking a lot about basically like the generational perspective of this, to where when you talk about risk aversity in that way, it's a mindset switch. And that's a learned behavior that a lot of people have. You were talking about your parents being Holocaust survivors. You alluded to people who lived through the Great Depression. And I think that a lot of those parents for people have this very well-intentioned idea of avoiding the risk, teaching their kids to avoid the risk because they want to get something stable. They don't want something bad to happen. But it seems like you've kind of flipped that on its head to where it's like, I have this perspective of real risk. Like I have this perspective of how bad things can be. And then you kind of turn that into a failure isn't fatal type of mindset to where you're more comfortable with that risk because you're realizing it's not as risky as it may seem to people. Do you think that's a correct interpretation of that? That there's this, that the desire for security can be limiting, and that if you let go of that desire for security, then you can get that greater reward by accepting that risk?
Wow, you hit the nail on the head, Camden. You really hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what happened to me. So just to give you a little bit more context there, when I was growing up, there was that, yeah, my parents imbued to me that sense of you've got to have security. You got to have security. You got to put money away. You got to save it. You've got to make it, and you've got to have security. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I kind of grew up with that. And even to this day, I always feel like, well, I'm not one of those people who's willing to risk everything I have for opportunity, because I know I need stuff. I need money to pay for my housing and my food and my clothing and those kinds of things. And so when I've taken risks, even those where I have put money in, it's like, all right, well, how would I feel if I lost that? Can I afford to lose that? And, at one point, and something crossed my mind as you were asking that question is, like my parents, because of how they grew up and what they had experienced in their lives, really didn't trust anybody outside of the immediate kind of family kind of thing. Didn't trust a soul. And my parents always used to say to me, you can't trust anybody. You cannot trust anybody. And I adopted a different way of looking at that, where I said, well, trust until someone does something that shows you shouldn't. I'm willing to trust. I take leaps of faith and say, and by the way, I do this in a calculated way where I say, all right, well, I just met this person. How do I know if I can trust them? I kind of sigh, and I'm not saying I'm great at this, but or that I'm better than other people, but I try to, size people up when I meet them and say, okay, is this someone that instinctively that I feel like I can trust? And if so, I'm going to trust them until they do something where they blow that out of the water and I can't do it anymore. And I would say that I have a fairly good sense of that, because most of the time when I decide to trust someone, it works out really well. I think, Otis, you and I, we're on a particular journey with which we're on kind of together, and we're part of an organization where we met an incredible group of people, and we just the level of trust and love and everything else that goes on there. And these are people a year and a half ago I didn't know. A year and a half ago I didn't know them, and now they're like, some of them are my best friends. And so unless you're willing to put yourself out there and trust, at least to some degree, I'm not saying trust everybody in the whole world, but calculated trust, then you can never overcome the fears and the mistakes or anything else. And that's just how I operate these days. And I remember a long time ago, when I was much younger, and my parents used to say, can't trust anybody. I always used to say the opposite. I used to say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, these seem like really nice people. Of course I trust them. And my mother would say to me, how can you trust them? I said, I don't know. I have an instinct that they're a really good person. I wasn't always right, but in fact, I was wrong a lot of times. But I just felt like, everybody deserves a chance. So I don't know if I'm rambling here. I hope I'm not. But so, yeah, I don't know. Something switched in my brain at some point when I was a young adult where I didn't adopt that don't trust anybody model.
I think that switch, before you go, Dad, that switch is so important because the reason I brought this up is because I had a conversation with actually our producer over the weekend. We were talking about generational trauma. And one of the things I brought up was this concept from some of my development economics classes of poverty traps. And you talk about the natural growth of capital, that, you know, more money now means more money later, and that type of a concept, and that people fall into these poverty traps to where they get stuck and they don't get that natural movement. And what I was kind of arguing to him was that risk aversity is a little bit of a poverty trap in a sense, that you're taught because your parents didn't have much, that you may need to have that sense of security, that you want to have that safety. But because you have that safety, you can't make the movements that are needed to really accrue the capital to create more of that momentum and to keep things moving forward. And I think the amazing thing that kind of came with that conversation I'm hearing and what you're saying too, Michael, is that that's just a mindset switch, and it can happen to any person at any time, you know. And this is a little bit of a just, I don't know, not even a little bit fallacious of an argument, but the you know, one of the things I said to him during that conversation was like, everyone's really like 1 or 2 generations away from being super wealthy when you look at it about it that way. That's the mindset switch of moving out of that mindset into the mindset where you're comfortable with that risk, because then you can get that reward and make those generational changes.
Is that a question?
It was not. I just had to get that point in before we changed on it.
Well, everything that you just said, Camden, is how I live my life. So yes, I mean, I can't say that we were in poverty, but we were kind of blue, what's what I'm looking for? Blue collar. We were very blue collar. My father worked in a factory as long as I remember until he retired. Okay. And so we were very blue collar, and grew up in a tenement house outside of Boston. And as I got older, I knew there was so much more than that. And I respect why they were fearful or were risk averse, but I just didn't want to live my life that way. I didn't want to get stuck living in a tenement house, or even in just a modest house. I wanted, and I'm not saying I live extravagantly, because I don't, but I want more, not just for myself, but because of what I can do with it. I think one of the things that we have learned, Otis, you and I have certainly learned, and Camden, you may as well, is it's about making an impact in the world. And if all you do is work at a job for security and never aspire to anything more, you're not going to have any impact in the world. And I want to have an impact in the world, not because my name is going to be on, I don't care about that, but just to change the world, even if it's just a little bit. Because certainly I believe the world needs changing. And I think that if I can contribute to that change, then count me in. And that's what I strive for. So whether it's to become more philanthropic, or to, encourage young people to entrepreneurship, or it's to do whatever it takes to move the needle and make a little bit of a seismic shift in how we as a society, and I don't mean just in this country, but throughout the world, have been operating. I think everybody, if everybody participated in that, we would have a huge shift that would really change the world in a better way significantly. So that's my goal.
Dang, that's like mic drop moment. I mean, it's like, okay, that's the show, folks. I'm out. I got like 4 more questions, but those aren't any fun now. Geez. I'm because I'm the host, I still get to ask my questions, even though they're not going to be as good as that. We'll have to like edit that part out and put it at the end and play.
That's okay. However you want to do it. I'm good.
Yeah. So what I wanted to follow up with, and this, I was thinking of this. We've always heard the story of the salesman that's a really good salesman that gets promoted to the sales manager, and that. Going back to you being the the non-typical, there we go, the non-typical accountant, how does that leadership that you have and that because when you want to make an impact, that is leadership. How did that kind of, and how do you manage that with your team and lead your team in that respect? It's a very broad question, I know.
Yeah, no, it is, and that's fine. And I can think of one answer to that. And maybe as we're talking, I can think of a few more, but I can think of one. And so I'll give you an example. So I have this woman who works for me who I hired right out of school. You know, she got her bachelor's degree in accounting, and I hired her. She's been with me now for 11 plus years. And to see where she was then to where she is now, where I can pretty much give her 70 to 80% of what I do, and I will review it and take a look at it, but she does the work. It's all about developing people and training people and trusting people to just do it. You know, a couple of years ago, I had to sit down with her and had a conversation with her, and I said, I really want you to take on more responsibility. Here are the things that I want you to do. And she said, well, I'm afraid. And I said, well, okay. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to not know how to do something, but I want you to give it a shot. I want you to try it. So, because she was very comfortable doing all the things that she had been doing up to that point, and she had gotten better at all of those. And now she went from 70 to 80% to 90%. And, she's like my right hand. I don't know what I would ever do if I lost her. I mean, I don't want to think about that, but, she does 90% of what I used to do. And, it just doesn't matter what it is. If it's something like super, super technical and complex, she'll reach out to me and say, well, how should I handle this? And I'll say, well, here's how I would handle it. And this is where you can go to find the answers. And if you still have problems, then let me know, and then I'll handle it. But I want you to understand what the process is here. So I think that is part of being a leader, is to give people the responsibility. And even if they don't know how to do something, teach them how to do it. And then, encourage them to not be afraid to make the mistake or have a failure. And because they'll learn from it, as we were talking about earlier. But, you got to, develop people, bring them up and say, you're really, really good. And I know that you can do more and better and all these other things. And are you willing to try? Because I think you'd be great at it. So make them feel important, make them feel good about who they are and what they're doing and how they have developed so far and how much more they can develop going forward. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I hope I am, but that's, in terms of leadership, I think that's part of being a leader, is to bring other people, encourage other people and bring them up to get closer to who you are. Because I think one of the other things, Otis, you and I have talked about a lot in the past is for most of us who are entrepreneurs and have a business, is the concept of working on the business rather than in the business, because we get bogged down. I don't know if Camden, if you and I have talked about this, I don't think we have. You get bogged down working in the business all the time. So it's about working on the business and watching other people kind of handle and managing those people so that they can handle all the things that need to get done.
Yeah, that's great. And I got a question that's really I think it's a good one for you because of how you look at things. Because when I, being the naive, being the business owner who says, give that to my accountant, Michael, give that to my accountant. I don't dive into it that much, but from what I know about the accounting industry, not a whole lot has changed, from the pencil and paper to the old calculator with the piece of paper.
Right.
Yeah, I thought you were reaching for one.
No, I actually have one on my desk.
See, and then now it's more software based,
Right.
but really the whole accounting thing hasn't changed. So where do you see accounting going in the future? Is really kind of what, like, is there something out there? Is there something boiling up that you, the calculating risk master, can see in the future?
I'm not sure I am qualified to answer all of that, but let me just give it a shot. So, first of all, I don't know that the accounting process and the profession hasn't changed. I think it has. There are these, there's this group called the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and they keep setting new standards and changing the way in which accounting for certain things needs to be handled. So those things change. Certainly on the tax side, things are constantly changing, and maybe not every year, but frequently. So it's about keeping up with those changes. I think to some degree, Otis, you may be right that, accounting is still accounting. There's debits and credits, in the accounting world. So yeah, we still have debits and credits called the double entry system. We still have that. And I'm not sure that that's ever going to go away because things have to balance. Things have to balance out.
Mm-hmm.
But the rules about how you account for certain things that happen in your business or even in your personal life do change. And CPAs need to, first of all, we have a requirement. I don't know if people know this. We have this horrendous requirement of 40 hours a year of continuing education. 40. That's like a whole week,
Yeah.
And
it ain't free either.
and it ain't free. And I recently did a 3-day conference in Denver, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I got 19 hours out of that. I said, yes, that's great. I got 19 hours out of my 40. So, I still have a few more to go this year. Anyway, so things do change a lot. And unless you're up on it and keep up on it, and we're required to do it anyway to renew our licenses, we need to go, there are changes. We need to adapt ourselves to all those changes. And every time there's a change in the tax law, the accounting profession bows down and thanks Congress because it's the Accountants Employment Act of that tax act. Because it keeps us working, it keeps us busy. But for me personally, that's not exciting to me. We just have to know what it is. But I don't know if I've answered your question, but so things change and don't change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, in the end, it's still profit and loss, assets and liability. I mean, it's still
methodology changes,
mm-hmm.
like you said earlier in your question. Methodology certainly changes. I remember coming from the days when, and I'm dating myself, when tax returns were done by hand, literally done by hand. And you had to have some kind of calculator to check your addition and subtraction, or your multiplication for tax rates at that time. But I went from that to where there was software where you had input sheets and you had to manually input the input sheets, and then you would send it to the software company. They'd input it. They'd send you the result, and then you'd look at that. Now, well, that doesn't look right. Then you change that and send it to them, and they'd send it back to you, to where now it's like we have everything right at our fingertips on the systems that we use for that. But my God, so we've certainly evolved in terms of methodology.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would almost equate it then in those theoretical principles of, it's kind of like the laws of physics, right? The laws of physics are the laws of physics. The laws of accounting are the laws of accounting. They don't, in 50 years, it'll still be profit, loss, asset, liability. It'll still be those foundational things, right?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right.
I want to add one question.
Here comes the economist, just warning everybody.
No.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. What was that, Otis?
Here comes the economist.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say that, and without getting overly specific on it, just kind of speaking broadly, maybe, broad strokes, just yes or no on this. A lot of different industries are looking to the future with AI, machine learning, all those different things of like, there's this breakthrough coming, whatever it may look like, there's a breakthrough coming in all sorts of different industries. Would you put accounting into that category, that like, without defining what it is, like, do you think that, next 5 to 10 years, like things are going to see that huge change that a lot of other industries are seeing? Or do you think it'll stay more incremental?
I can't see it happening in the accounting industry. I cannot see that happening now. I think that there is too much in the way of requirements for subjective analysis that I don't think AI. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't see AI creeping into the accounting profession. I mean, and to be honest with you, and this is my caveat, I'm not. I mean, I certainly am familiar with AI and what it's doing in certain industries and so forth, but I just don't know enough about it to be really qualified to answer the question with respect to how it may or may not impact the accounting profession. But the more subjectivity in your field, the longer it'll take for it to affect you, probably. Absolutely, yeah. Look, like from what I understand, AI can be, I guess, subjective on certain matters, but I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Interesting. Yeah. That's I guess really, as you said those things, it kind of, that makes sense from my point of view, and those different things of accounting.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my notes list, and for my what did I learn, and I love the fact that you use the pros and cons list to see that the risk and decide whether or not it was worth it. And I mean, something that was taught very early on in my military career in the planning, and what are the pros and cons of this, pros and cons of that. And so I love that fact that you use that, and that's what I'm going to chalk up as folks, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to mitigate your risk and understand what's the risk you're willing to take, and see those pros and cons.
Yeah, and I've heard the term. There's a term that's bandied about a lot with risk called calculated risk, and I'm not sure that that's what I'm doing. Maybe I am. I don't know, but I think using that legal size paper and doing the pros and the cons, that's kind of calculated.
Yeah.
You look at what makes sense. What side of that pro or con do most of the things fall on? The majority of the things. And then are you still willing to do it?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's such a simple thing.
I've taken some wild risks in my life, where I've invested in live performance and theater. And I learned a lot because my first time doing that, I was invited. I know this guy. I know several people here in New York who are Broadway producers. And these days, there's no one producer that produces a show anymore. It's a team of producers, because the capitalization is so high that no one of them by themselves can make that happen. So they assemble a team of producers. And if you ever go to a Broadway show, which I know you're going to do soon, you look at the playbill and you see who's who in the production, and you look at all the producers. It's probably at least a dozen to 15 or maybe 20 producers. Okay, and each one of those producers then goes out and finds investors. They put up some of their own money, but then to increase their leverage, they go out and find investors. Well, I've been one of those investors. Okay, and the first time I ever did it, the show closed in 3 weeks. And of course, I lost my investment. And then the second time I did it, and this was on Broadway, the second time I did it on Broadway, it didn't close in 3 weeks, but it closed soon enough where I lost my investment. Okay. And then these were educational experiences for me, because I realized that chances are, in that realm, if you invest in a Broadway show, unless it becomes a mega hit, like The Producers or Book of Mormon or, Mamma Mia or The Phantom of the Opera, you're going to lose your money. chances are you're going to lose your money. So I discovered that there's a place though where you can make money, and that's in domestic and foreign touring companies, because they have there's no capitalization. So they can make their money back real fast. And not only that, potentially turn a profit. So I've done some of that, but so that was like an experience where I was paying as I go, so to speak, where at the beginning I said, all right, but then I said, no, I'm not doing that anymore, but I will do that, and then I invested in a Vegas show. And
because that'll be different than Broadway, right?
Very different than Broadway. And it's a magic show. And it's with a very famous magician. And that is like a cash cow machine. It's like ka-ching, ka-ching. Every time I turn around, not every time, but a lot of times, all of a sudden I see money wired into my account. So on a net basis, I'm still down, but I'm happy with what I have right now.
It doesn't hurt as bad now, right?
No, it doesn't hurt as bad.
But you?
But I'll tell you, when I first started doing it, those were not what I would call calculated risks. They were wild risks.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it because I thought, wouldn't it be cool to kind of get in with the Broadway crowd?
Yeah, the prestige of that.
Yeah. And so I've met a lot of celebrities in that world. And most of them are really cool people. And just because they happen to be on stage or a director or a producer or whatever, they're just cool people. They're people just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. You think they're cool because they're up there and you're watching them in the audience, but and they are kind of cool. But they're regular people.
That's awesome. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
This is kind of the mic drop foot stomper moment about halfway through the show, but affect change where you can. Kind of recognize, we all want to change the world. And so like this idealistic idea that you could change the world just as one person, but you can in small ways, and that's how you really affect change. And the econ brain to me is like, it's division of labor, focus where your skill is and affect the change right there, and you'll get the most effect out of it.
And I would add to that if you're one of those people who wants to affect change that way, and you do what you do, you surround yourself with other people who want to affect change, then it's unlimited in terms of what you can affect.
Oh, that's awesome. Michael, how about you? What'd you learn?
What I learned from what?
From today. Come on, man.
Today is, I learned that I am talking to two amazing people. And Otis, I know you better than I know Camden. Camden, I look forward to getting to know you better. And I learned that, you have prompted me, you've asked me questions that made me think back on a lot of things that I don't normally think about. And it's kind of nice to, realize why I am where I am today. And because I don't think about it every day. I'm just, maybe I was there yesterday or a year ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago, but I mean, I'm here today and I often don't think about, well, how'd I get here? So you helped me realize that, which is really great.
That's awesome. How do people find you? What's the best way to connect with you, hire you and your team for accounting services?
I have a website. It's michaelmarkiewicz.net. I have a media kit, which is, and I'll tell you that in a minute, it's michaelmarkiewiczmedia.com. And you can reach me, I believe, through either of those methods. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I'm happy to share phone numbers and emails. But you will see, like, for example, I'm looking at my media kit. It has my email address at the bottom of that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, so that would probably be the best way.
And we'll put those links in the show notes. For those of you who don't know how to spell Markiewicz, it's okay. It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, it's not the easiest spelling.
That's right. Michael, man, this has been great. This has been a lot of fun. We sure appreciate having you on the show and your time today.
Well, I'm honored, first of all. Thank you for having me. I've had a really great time talking with both of you. And I hope we can do it again sometime. But I have really, really, really enjoyed this.
Awesome.
I would say the highlight of my day at this point. So,
And you're
And
only halfway
and-
through.
And he's on the East Coast, so he's had more day than I've had. So that's
well,
actually
it's
meaning
now,
something
it's
over
now
there.
a little after, it's now a little after 1:00 here. So,
Awesome. All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to the Cam and Otis show. And a special thanks to our guest, Michael Markiewicz, for joining us today. That's the worst one I've ever done. Michael Markiewicz, there we go. Can't spell it, can't say it. And of course, to our sponsor, Tribe and Purpose. Find your tribe, find your purpose. Get started for free today at findyourpurpose.coach. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis show on Instagram and Facebook. And please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening. Videos of the podcast are on our YouTube page, and you can always get a full archive of our episodes at the Cam and Otis show.buzzsprout.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.